IVM.
Hi everybody, just wanted to ask everyone for a quick favor. We're running a brand survey right now and would really appreciate it if you could let us know what you think about the advertising on IVM. Go to ivmpodcast.com/survey and do let us know. As part of this, we'll be selecting 10 random participants and sending them some IVM swag, so do fill out those surveys.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. I'm Atish Padhy, and with me today is Arjun Gargeyas, who is a research analyst working with our high-tech geopolitics program. Arjun recently wrote an op-ed on India's emerging 5G standard called the 5GI and the implication that is likely to have in India's domestic markets. But before we get into the conversation itself, let me tell you about our courses. At Takshashila, we offer 3-month-long public policy courses, the next cohort for which begins on September 4th. If the conversations that we have here on All Things Policy interest you, you should consider taking these courses out. For example, the topic we're talking about in today's All Things Policy is 5G. And there's a lot of material covered on this topic on our technology and policy program. To check out and apply, head over to our website at school.takshashila.org.in. Do remember that the applications close on 28th August. Welcome, Arjun. How are you doing?
Yeah, Atish, good to be here.
So, Arjun, I want to begin this conversation on a broader perspective. So why are international standards important for emerging technologies? And why is this conversation around 5G become so important and heated? And where does India stand in?
So basically, the thing is, nowadays, international standards, especially in emerging technologies, has been used more or less like a geopolitical tool to stamp your authority in the tech domain. So once your country standards or the company which is based in your country has the international standards, they basically control the future prospects in the field. And why 5G is it's a very broad question. But the thing is, when the US-China trade war just started, and 5G just came into the picture. And that made 5G become like a fulcrum of geopolitical rivalry between the US and China. And China recently has been consistently having its own ambitions in setting and influencing these international standards, especially in the emerging tech field. They have their own project called as the China Standards 2035 project, wherein they plan to kind of influence international standards across all domains. But they have consistently increased their influence, especially in the 3GPP group, the 3GPP, which is nothing but the third generation project partnership, which is a body of industrialists and technical experts who are responsible for the setting of these international standards in telecommunications. They have the leadership roles in the 3GPP has been consistently increasing in the favor of China, and they have managed now to kind of, with Huawei, which is their own company, they've managed to kind of influence the 5G standards. And that is why the whole conversation around 5G and international standards and standards in telecommunication is so important right now. And India has now come into the picture.
Yeah, so on that part about India coming into the picture, so in 2020, India's own standard, the 5GI, got approved by a UN-based body that approves standards for emerging telecommunications standards, right? So what exactly is 5GI, and why was it used? Why was it developed in India? Because from what I know, it was developed in IITs, so it seems to be a research-first project instead of something that was developed maybe commercially within the industry. So is there a specific problem it is trying to solve, or is it India's attempt to enter into this conversation of 5G, where so far it had not been present?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. The thing is, 5G was actually first started with an intention of solving India's own problems in the telecom sector. Basically, 5GI was, as you said, was created by the researchers and scientists at IIT. They created this with the intention of bridging the urban-rural divide in technology, basically. And they claim to have a specific technology called as the low mobility cell in the 5GI, which enhances the signal from base station. And this in turn increases rural coverage. So that in that way, India started out as the whole the reason behind 5GI, but now the fact.
Sorry to interrupt you, but so what you're trying to say is having a fewer number of base stations can still help get 5G connectivity to remote areas because you don't have to build a lot of stations in order to get it there.
Exactly. So infrastructure development will take time, right? So if you're going to build more stations across India and especially in rural India, it's already going to take time. So now with this technology, which they claim to have discovered and put in 5GI, Indian telecom companies which are using 5GI could actually reach the rural part of India, which would have not been a part of the whole telecom sector before. So that was the main intention in creating 5GI. But now that that 5G has become such a geopolitical topic, it would seem that India is also entering into the geopolitical space of setting its own standards and influencing international standards, especially in 5G. So that is the main.
Right. So even if India's intention wasn't to enter the conversation and it was only trying to solve a domestic problem, it will be seen by maybe, let's say, China especially, as India's attempt to enter into this conversation in itself. Right. So in your op-ed, Arjun, you do a deep dive into the implications that 5G is going to have on the Indian market. Right. So zooming in and moving away from the broader geopolitical conversation, what are some of the challenges, and we'll go into them one by one. What are some of the challenges that you broadly identify with this entire 5G conversation?
Yeah. So the first and the most basic one is the necessity. Like, why is it actually really necessary for India to set its own standard right now? I mean, I get the whole point of the bridging the rural-urban divide, but can't it be done with the existing standards which are already set in place? So, as you mentioned, that we got the approval from the ITU, that's the International Telecommunications Union, in 2020, but they are not the ones who are responsible for setting international standards. It's always rests with the 3GPP, and we still haven't got the approval from the 3GPP. So currently, 5GI would still remain a local standard. It is not still an international standard. And the fact that India has not even tested 5G, like they do not have the equipment to test 5G. The infrastructure has not come up to test 5G. And the fact that we are already so behind in the 5G race, setting your own standards and making companies comply with the standard will just push the arrival of 5G way back. It's already late, but it's going to be detrimental to both India and the entire telecom world if 5G does not come fast to India. And that's where the question of necessity arises. Was it actually required at this point of time? So that's one of the main implications which can be addressed by 5GI. So yeah.
Right. So what is the industry's view on this? Like, for example, does India's domestic industry view this favorably? Because you do mention that there are likely to be some high compliance costs. And I'm sure there will be other unintended consequences that we'll be touching upon. So what is the industry thinking about it? Has there been pushback against this 5GI standard?
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what's happening in this country right now. So the telecom industry in India is already floundering, and the local companies, at least the giants themselves, like Airtel, Vodafone, Jio, they first started off with actually complying and agreeing to it, but then Airtel and Vodafone started pushing back and saying we're not going to agree to 5GI. And Jio was the only one left who was supporting the government's view on 5GI. But now even Jio has also come into the side of Airtel and Vodafone, and they're saying make 5GI just an option for every company in India itself. So that is one of the things. And they also question the fact that what if 5GI just becomes a local standard? What if it cannot become an international standard? That time, any kind of technological development that can happen with 5G will not come to India. That's basically you're putting like a bridge yourself between going forwards and in technological development, and then having your own standard and having your own companies come up with a new technology to support that standard. So if by instance there is another major breakthrough in 5G technology, and it can be done only on the international standards, India cannot gain that advantage, cannot gain the fruits of those labors. So that is where the whole concept occurs. And the fact that because India's testing has been so underdeveloped, the developers who have worked on 5GI consistently say that this is just an extension to the 5G standard, and only minor tweaks in software and code would actually kind of bridge the gap. But we don't know that. Like the companies who are going to implement this do not have any way of saying, okay, this is what is true, and this is, if the scientists say this is what is actually the truth. So because they haven't been able to test it, they don't know what additional costs they'll incur by actually deploying 5GI, because they were already well set and they were prepared to an extent to start with 5G deployment. Now, with the government coming out and saying everyone should comply to their new standard, would just make it very put everyone at a disadvantage. Now, it would not be a single company, but the entire telecom sector in India would be put at a disadvantage. So that is why 5GI is kind of on the fence with respect to both getting approval and getting support from the local industry themselves.
Right. So I very clearly understand your point about why having a separate standard within India might be detrimental, because, as you say, it's like it's an entirely different format to speak in a way, right? And there'll be high costs for you to get that within India. But so, why is it not very feasible, for example, for this to be exported as an international standard, right? Because we have not gotten the approval from 3GPP yet, right? Yet, what is it that is stopping it from being so? Because if I understand it, and if 5GI is supposed to be working the way the scientists claim it is working, then wouldn't it be net benefit for countries outside India also if they can have fewer base stations and the signal carries further forward? Then why not? What is it that is stopping from this becoming a emergent standard? But because also it gets the companies developing it will also increase their revenue because of the licensing and all the royalties that they're going to get paid from it. So, what can India do to push it forward, and what is stopping us from doing it? Why are we looking at it as something that's just a domestic standard, and why we can't make it into a larger international standard?
That's a really good question. So why we are not able to kind of influence our stand or like keep ourselves in the running for setting it as an international standard basically depends on the capacity which our sector has, right? So we do not have that manufacturing capacity. So if we are going with our own standard, so imagine if US goes with its own standards, and generally US has been successful in setting international standards in emerging tech. So they have the support of their industry. So they have companies like Qualcomm, Cisco, who are like pioneers in making this hardware which can be tailor made to their standard. And recently, if we see, Europe has been, I mean, Europe was always been in the running, and they had Nokia, Siemens, and recently with China having Huawei. So each country has the capacity of the telecom industry in each country is such that they have companies who are willing to put their uh,
Take that risk.
take that risk, basically. Put the credibility on the line and say, okay, this is the standard we're going for, and because it has the government backing, we can invest in it and we can get our own standards. But India does not have that liberty.
Yeah. Because also this is developed outside of the industry in an IIT.
So even if it gets government backing, who's going to come out and say that we are
put themselves
who are going to come out and say that we are going to develop this, we are going to make the hardware for this, we are going to completely put in effort and make this a reality and say this is going to be the next international standard? Because we don't have that kind of capacity ourselves, it is futile in our own self-interest to go behind this. It would seem like as if we're reaching for the stars without actually taking off. So that's why.
Right. So are there, because I think about it in the sense of, is there any precedent of this happening in the past? And is there something that India can learn from, right? Because the standard wars have been happening for all technologies, but even within the telecommunications, we have had previous generations, 4G, 3G. So are there similar wars that have happened over international standards for these previous generations of telecommunications? Is there something that India can learn from, so that the next time when we're shooting for the stars, we can actually learn to take it?
Yeah, so the thing is that's a really interesting question. So because that exactly happened just two decades back. So when China was still, a nascent player in technology, they had their own industry develop its own local standards during the 3G era. This was in the mid 2000s somewhere. So that time 3G was basically the world. The 3G world was divided into two standards: one the US led, and one the Europe led. The US led was CDMA, and the Europe led was TDMA. And China had their own standard, which was basically a local one at that point of time. And they went ahead with it. They started the deployment using their own standard, and they realized it wasn't not going to happen. It was not a success. And what happened was they came back to the global standards table during the 4G era, and they complied with the LTE standard, which was basically the worldwide standard for 4G. So that happened. And why China is kind of making sure that they're not repeating the same mistake now is that they had the first mover advantage. They have been investing in 5G since, I guess, by 2013, 2014. That's a long time. And they have managed to kind of increase their capacity, increase the influence they have, and make sure that the technology which they're developing is on the same scale as the West. And that is why they're pushing forward with their own standard right now. And because they have that confidence that this would be accepted across the domain, and they would eventually make it an international one. India, on the other hand, has not kind of been able to do that because they're already so behind. The fact that we do not have the groundwork which should be laid before this kind of thing is taken up has not been there. So the groundwork hasn't been laid. And the fact that this might kind of be a self goal on ourselves, saying that we're going to follow our own local standard because we believe in technological self-sufficiency and Atmanirbhar and all that. So it kind of would be detrimental to Indian citizens' interests, Indian telecom industry itself, and the fact that they do not have that leverage over anyone else. Basically, they everything is against them, and they're pushing against a wall and saying we can do it. But can they do it? It can be done, but the fact that it takes a long time, right? So they cannot just come into the picture and say we can do it. But what they should do is, in any other emerging tech, they should kind of get a first mover advantage, invest in it from before, ensure that their technology is on par with the rest of the world, and then move forward with it. And that time they have a better chance of getting through. And the international setting an international standard is a big deal. Like, you can control it, right? So in the end, you can license your standards and you can get royalty payments from it. And that's why China so badly wants their own standard to happen. So once India can do that, it will be great. But personally, I think it's not the time for India to be worrying about international standards, especially in 5G, because they need to develop their own technological capabilities and then move forward with the setting of an international standard.
All right, before we continue our conversation with Arjun, it's time for a short break. Join us on the other side.
Hey, it's been another great week on the IVM Podcast Network. On Know Your Kanun, Keshu Chaturvedi talks to Amber about climate change laws and their implications. We have a new show, The Last Brand Standing. Anupam Gupta and Ambi Parmeshwar get together and discuss some of the biggest and most public feuds in Indian brand history. Do check that out. On Candid Kannan, actor Priyank Sharma spills the beans about his career controversies and reality shows. On The Habit Coach, Ashton teaches the way to maintain the habit of persistence. On Tere Mere Raste, Keshu takes us to the famous city of Kochi to discover its heritage. And on News Kids on the Blocks, catch the week's updates from Afghanistan's horrifying crisis to Messi's exit from Barcelona. Do follow us on social media. We're IVM Podcast on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any other show for that matter, please do tell a friend. And finally, we'd like to thank our sponsors on the network this week, Seat, Cred, Bank of Baroda, Quarter, CoinSwitch, Kuber, and Intuit India. Thank you so much for making this possible.
Welcome back. We're talking to Arjun Gargeyas on India's emerging 5G standard, the 5GI. All right, so now just to wrap this conversation up, I want to go back right to the beginning where you made the point that this is supposed to solve a domestic problem within India, right? So now, how does India do it? If 5GI is not going to be effective, it is facing so much backlash from the industry, and we do not seem to have the capacity or the capability to test it out and see whether or not it's working, how easy it is to convert. So what does India do to solve that original problem of the rural-urban divide, especially when India is trying to take everything that we do increasingly online with the vaccination program, for example? India is increasingly going to a more digital-first approach. And in that case, it's increasingly becoming more important to solve the urban-rural divide on technology. So how else can India do this if not through a domestic, indigenously developed standard?
So first of all, India can first invest and develop infrastructure, basically. So the thing is, the telecom infrastructure across the country has not been up to the par. I mean, it wasn't until maybe 2 decades back when it was just BSNL or MTNL who were the major players. Now that there are so many private players like Airtel, Vodafone, Jio, it has increased and it has developed to an extent. But the thing is, the private players would do what would be good for them. The state in the end would do what is good for the citizens. That's their responsibility. So the state and the government should invest and build infrastructure, especially of 5G technology, across the country first. Build more base stations, increase coverage by actually going to and seeing which villages don't have this kind of connectivity. So that is where you can figure out where the problem is. And one more thing is the fact that we are we are so behind that we should increase our testing capabilities, right? So before we deploy the technology on the ground, it should be tested, and the testing part should take, it takes a lot of time for that to happen. And the fact that India has not tested 5G yet just puts it at the back of the pack. So once they start to test, they develop this testing capabilities similar to COVID. I mean, you develop testing capabilities to figure out what is wrong, and then only you can figure out how to make it right. So once you kind of do that, we can move forward and we can address the problems. There is obviously a urban rural divide, especially in technology and accessibility to technology, but is kind of following your own standard and saying this is the only way to do it? No, it's not. It's, I mean, the technology might work, whatever the 5G is offering, and it is very good if the technology works, but do we have proof that it works? Because we haven't tested it yet. And the fact that they're not willing to test it, the telecom companies are not willing to be get on board with it, just kind of puts it on the back foot again. So this, we just have to figure out where the inherent problem lies, and then just solve it in an incremental process. We cannot go from like 1 to 10 at the same time. Rather go from 1 to 2, 1, 2 to 4, something like that. So the responsibility of the government and the Indian telecom industry would obviously be of the concern of Indian citizens. So that is what they should focus on. I mean, it's obviously more profitable for, say, Jio if they have better 5G connectivity across the country. Let them figure out how to do it, right? So you don't have to push a standard and say this is you need to follow it, and this is how you have to do it. They let them figure out a way to do it. They will figure out a way to do it because it's more profitable for them. And this is where, when you give that kind of leeway to your own companies and the private sector, they will
figure solutions out.
Yeah, they should figure solutions out. They will. And in the end, at that time, you could actually develop more capacity. And when you develop more capacity, you can always go for an ambitious,
like China is doing right now with the 5G.
Exactly. So hopefully that happens soon.
Not to put the cart before the horse.
Exactly.
All right. So thank you very much for joining us today, Arjun. And it was an excellent, insightful conversation. That brings us to the end of our conversation. If you enjoyed it, do make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Takshashila INST, and also apply to our courses, the next cohort for which starts on 4th September. Join us next time. Thank you.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is at IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle at Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
Have you ever wondered where the business world is headed? How the ways in which we create, market, and sell to consumers will evolve? Or if we'll ever go back to wearing pants while working? For answers to all of this and more, tune into Advertising is Dead with me, Varun Girala. Every Tuesday, as I talk to entrepreneurs, leaders, and change makers from across business, media, marketing, and beyond. You can catch all episodes of Advertising is Dead on the IVM Podcast website, app, or wherever you get your podcast from.
Are you looking for finance products and services that can enhance your personal finance experience? Are you looking for a space to talk about your financial product or service? And are you looking for a crisp talk show where the conversation is all about money? Well, your search ends here. Hi, my name is Anupam Gupta and I'm host of the Paisa Paisa podcast, and I invite you for the conversation about your personal finance on each Monday on the IVM Podcast app or the website or on any podcast streaming platforms. See you folks.